thing because it's a recurring invite. Hey, we're live. We're actually live. Sorry, technology.
We're live.
Now we're live. How's it going?
Hi, how you doing?
Here with Ethan Gouldini, one of the artists and the lead artist of Sometimes Kingdom and Stillfleet the game for Stillfleet Studio. And also very involved with all of our games because we're all working on everything. So Ethan, how's it going? We were just talking about some different specific projects and some specific aspects of being a professional illustrator, which we can kind of recap for the audience. But before we do that, let's talk about what we're drawing today. So let's set a little agenda.
Yeah, so agenda-wise, today I was thinking, since we've had a pretty fun road so far, starting to knock off some of the bestiary section for the Sometimes Kingdom RPG. I sort of was thinking about like, well, it's always fun to do a little bit of figure drawing live. So to kill two birds with one stone, I was going to knock off a one of the encounters on the list is a character called a Cartghast, which is a type of a spectral a type of a ghost. Which is cursed to carry around either a large knapsack or a wheelbarrow laden with gear. They are essentially the ghosts of item hoarders from previous adventures that players might encounter. So I thought I would draw that guy because I feel like a weird ghost carrying around a wheelbarrow full of shit is a really great thing to draw.
That sounds awesome. So that makes sense. So we're working on art for the Sometimes Kingdom RPG, which is in development, of which there's a free early access edition that does not have monsters. We're adding the monsters. That's one reason we're doing the monsters, the pre-gens, basically stuff that isn't in the book. But there's tons of other fun stuff in the book. You can make characters, and because it's the grid system, and it's probably the game that's more similar to Stillfleet of the four games we have so far. This one, in terms of kind of dice and powers, is a little more one-to-one, other than magic, obviously. So you could easily GM by just making up creatures and giving them, dice of different sizes. But we are going to publish some, official bestiary entries relatively soon. So that makes sense to me, Ethan, and I'm very excited to see. Thank you. Say it one more time. Cartghast.
It's a Cartghast.
Cool. The Cartghast come to life. So with that, sorry, I know we were talking before we figured out how to go live, which is my bad. We were talking about hypergraphicism, or whatever the term would be, the noun version, and also just having, like, I don't know, tennis elbow, like real stuff. Not to put you on the spot, but you're kind of sharing a little about that.
Yeah. So it's fun drawing a character whose singular obsession has cost them in sort of almost like a very classic Japanese haunted spirit sort of way. Their obsession has caused them to be turned into a monster based on that obsession, which is one of my all-time favorite tropes. Yeah, it is. One of my special interests and my singular fixation has been since I was a kid is drawing. I do it all the time. I do it waiting in line. I do it in class. I do it in meetings. My mother was the same way. So it's clearly she was an artist and a teacher too. So it's sort of a family business, and a family interest. But you get to a certain age, like one does, and you find out that the way that you sort of been carrying yourself is like, and I'm given my sort of health conditions, I'm pretty in shape for the sort of limitations that I have. I have a rare condition called spondylitis, which has severely sort of limited like my physical activity. But I feel like I've managed it in a way that has let me be quite physically fit and kept my chronic pain pretty low these days, which is awesome. But it is a limitation. Fortunately, that limitation doesn't really affect drawing too much. However, just getting older does. And as a working artist, I'm like, as somebody with this obsession, I'm drawing nonstop, and it has given me a classic computer worker's difficulty, tennis elbow. And I guess really I've only become consciously aware of it over the past 2 weeks or so. It's something that I've been sort of dealing with on and off, but it was always like in my mind, putting in a box like, oh, my arm's hurting this week, or like, oh, I'll just sort of deal with this, but I'll get a brace and it's fine. Turns out that's not how tendons work. We learn things. And So now I'm sort of in the point of being like, well, I guess I didn't quite notice how bad the problem had gotten, which is I think pretty common for people of all stripes doing all kinds of things, whether computer work or craft work or sports or whatever. So now I'm sort of in the moment of like, well, I am seeing professionals to insurance wise deal with the problem. Um, it's really tricky. I feel like we were just having this discussion where as a working professional, and this is the shittiness of like the American economy and just sort of like the nature of freelancing. Like you tend to kind of just do the thing and not like clients don't really want to hear about what's going on or like how things are going. They just kind of want to see the work. And if you can't do the work, you have to tell them so they can find somebody else to do the work. Um, that is it really sucks. But I mean, you wind up sort of like managing. But then you get to a certain like period like this, and it's like I think I'm at a point in my career right now where I can just sort of like be more open and be like, hey, listen, like here's the thing that's happening, and I'm getting it treated, and we'll figure it out. And the people I work with are like, cool, we'll figure out a way around that. It's a very different mindset than the one when you're coming up and you just kind of have to do the thing. Um, I feel like we all have to try and make space for that kind of open communication, but then the onus is on us to like communicate that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Especially with like a history of like communicating that stuff is bad, but like you get to a certain point and like communication is good. Um, but that's like you can communicate that stuff better when you have like enough clients to just sort of like be able to flow and work around something or like do something like with it. It really is shitty because it's like oftentimes you just kind of have to deal with it. And then you wind up eventually with a chronic condition. So the real way to deal with it is to get a time machine and do stretching exercises in your 20s and never stop doing
Yeah.
them.
Well,
Whoops.
also, I think one way to think about it is that it's different if you're a solo freelance illustrator or anything. For in my case, solo freelance writer, editor, or game, designer, producer, versus having a collective of some kind. So, as we currently are structured, it's like one reason to have a small team is to jump in and out and be able to support each other and all work on things and get things done. So,
Yeah.
I think that's also part of the goal of, as opposed to if we each had our own little businesses kind of making games together, but like then it would be about contracts and arguing about, time and deadlines and stuff. Whereas instead it's like, okay, we're all just going to do it together and just see if we can go from making $0 to some dollars to full time. And like, how
Yeah.
would that work? So I think maybe it's almost more collectively figuring out, okay, how does someone who has multiple skills, contribute when, one skill is kind of offline due to health reasons, which could, happens to any of us. Like you get COVID, somebody get hit by a car, and we don't want as friends in a small business to say, okay, as you say, like do the capitalist thing of like, okay,
Yeah.
they get their agreed upon severance of $0 because we don't have any money, and that's it,
Yeah.
right? That's all she wrote. They go
Time
to the
comes for us all.
Soylent Green garbage,
Ooh.
recycler. So, given that we're not, Ethan, you're not going to the garbage recycler, but you are dealing with tennis
Oh.
elbow. How can you say anything, just out of curiosity, and if it's fine, if no, I'm doing it the same way, but are you changing anything physically with how you're drawing
Yes.
heart gas today? This kind of uh,
So
tech
so one of
ghost.
the things that I'm doing, you can't really see it. So this was taught to me by Nathan Fox, who's the head of the visual narrative, my master's program department, and also a very talented designer and illustrator. There are specific ways of moving your shoulder and specific ways of holding your pen. So typically, and I'm also wearing a brace. This actually looks very severe. It's just the thing that keeps your wrist from bending in a weird way because I tend to hyperextend it. So if you're holding a pencil like this, typically, like I will death grip a pencil. It's actually a thing that because I was taught how to use my left hand incorrectly in elementary school, because of the 80s. So I had to sort of reteach myself penmanship and how to hold the thing. I did that years ago, and I realized like, oh, this is actually really terrible for me. This is a really wonderful thing. It's called an ergo grip. If you're using a digital stylus, I highly recommend these things. You can also just make one out of like foam and tape. But like I really like the silicone squishiness. If you tend to grip your fingers really tightly, like I do, it sort of stops you from over gripping because it's just like silicone around your pen. And then the way that I hold, this is so funny because this gets really into like ergonomics. There's a way to hold your pencil. It takes a little bit of getting used to. You hold it above so you are not like pressurizing your hand. You're using side grippy for your fingers like this. So when you're pressing down, you're not like using the same muscles over and over again. Um, The way that I'm also dealing with it, which is kind of a cheat, is I am ambidextrous. I haven't used it in a very long time, so it's actually been slow going. So like in a real pinch, I just switch hands. Not everybody can do that, and to be honest, I haven't done it in so long that like I'm not even sure if it's worth it for me to do it. But I can do it. So that's one option. Really, the answer to the question of how to deal with this is to take breaks. Even if you like the way that I had it explained to me by a physical therapist, the best thing I've ever heard is you're taking exercise snacks. Like you are like, oh, I've been working for half an hour. I'm gonna have a little stretch snack. You just stretch for 2 minutes, and it's like the difference between like stretching at the end of the day after 6 hours of working versus stretching for 2 minutes every hour the entire day is a really big difference. So we learn things about the body that people basically that we're paying money to yell at us to take care of. So
Yeah,
really,
good to know.
it's about pacing, it's about timing, and it's about listening to your body. Even if you kind of have to selectively ignore it sometimes to like get something done, there are lots of things that you can do to be better to yourself. Especially since like when we're in the moment, when we're in a flow, which can be so rare, like getting into the flow, but then getting out of the flow to just move your body around a little bit is probably the best thing that you can do for yourself.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that is, and that is that balance you were speaking of, you feel like you have to keep going on a, for professional reasons, but then you feel like you have to figure out ways to kind of give yourself a break for, health reasons. So thanks for sharing a bit there. If we're looking at the illustration itself of the Carcast, if I recall correctly from last time when we were talking about kind of monster design, quote unquote, you were sort of starting with maybe what I would call thumbnails, and then
Yeah.
kind of picking elements, copying them, and then doing kind of the final version, but keeping that, maybe just hiding the layers where it's like the messing around sketch. Is this, I'm guessing, the messing around sketch part, what we're seeing right now?
So this is the messing around sketch right now. What I'm doing is I am trying to, it's actually kind of funny because it's like, well, my body's a little stiff because I'm dealing with this stuff. So it's funny because like that sort of body awareness will sometimes like affect art. This is actually a pretty good piece for that to be happening with, because this is somebody who is like, I'm trying to like split the difference between somebody who's like doubled over with their burden, but then also moving really quickly because it's supposed to be a ghost who, despite their burden, maybe they don't move as fast, like stats wise, as other kinds of like spirit encounters. But he's supposed to be able to move pretty fast. So I'm like kind of making them sprinting. I'm not so sure if the top and the body like figuration is working for that. But right now I'm just sort of messing around over and over again. I think I really like where the shoulder is. I think that sort of like bend in the shoulder is what I'm going to go with. But I think the rest of him is looking a little bit, I guess the wrong kind of silly is the way to do. So yeah, so this is right here is the thumbnail, and like if I were art directing this, so art directing myself, um, I'd be like, I really like this section here. I like the hunch. Like if he's gonna be burdened with something, it should be up here, not like a traditional backpack. This is pretty good here. Like this here is sort of like a little too. It's kind of stiff in the wrong way, and that's just sort of like a vibe that I'm getting. Like perspective wise, is like a leg isn't in enough perspective, and I kind of like I accidentally made the head a little bit long, but I kind of really like it. So it's like long head, hunched shoulders, clear hearts, can't lose. So now like kind of using that, like maybe I'll do like a couple of little thumbs thinking about like the placement of the head and the body in relation to each other. Um, I did actually look up a couple of pictures of people holding wheelbarrows before.
Yeah,
It's
little
it's
reference.
funny. Little reference. I don't super have it pulled up right now. Just because for me like these sort of sessions are like a fun exercise in like memory versus like using reference. It actually might be fun sometime to do like a full reference sheet and then do one of these hour sessions with a reference to show that too. I think that might be a fun exercise.
Here's another quick question. How much, so in terms of that, do you typically do a lot of work pulling up reference? Do you typically
It
work more purely in terms of Fantasia? Is it some mix? Like, can you talk a little about that process and
Yeah,
just the
sure.
time involved? Because, we're doing hundreds of illustrations of things for books. So how much do you
Yeah,
look up each one,
it's a real it that really depends on like on stuff like quantity and deadlines. I tend to with figuration stuff just because I find it fun. I tend to not work with reference for that. I have been starting to incorporate more figure reference into it purely because it's faster. There's a certain clip that you work at where it's like, even if you know muscles and bodies and positions and poses, you're just not loading it up fast enough. I'm not quite there yet. So I've been finding like I've been incorporating more reference into stuff like that. When it comes to physical objects and stuff like that, I tend to use hello reference just because it's fun to look at. Um, there's always a challenge with reference where you sort of like the reference kind of becomes the main deal. You start organizing it and looking at it, and it's like really fun. And then you've got a reference sheet, and that reference sheet has got like 20 things on it, and you're like, well, okay, well, I can keep that in my head, but am I going to remember the schema of what I put in my head to ideate this like tomorrow, next week, a month from now? We have to revisit it. So I have been finding recently that like going through 2 stages of reference has been sort of more fun. And honestly, like a little bit less stressful, where it's like, I'll just look through a bunch of images and put them all together into a folder. And I'm like, yeah, all these things are cool concepts. And maybe I'll do like some like quick sketches or line works or just like sketch those objects because I want to add them to my data bank of like what I know how to draw. But then when it comes time to actually use, reference for the actual piece, I'll start limiting it to at most like 6, and honestly like 2 or 3. Because really, like with illustration, like unless you're doing something really, really complex like a hero illustration, which would be like a full page figure with full color, full line work, full all that stuff. Um, you're really trying to operate with just like one idea, maybe 2. And like 2 ideas crashed together is going to be perceived as a really cool creative thing. If you start doing more than that, like you're kind of throwing a lot of time at something that you might not have the time to throw the time at. So it really winds up being like a piece by piece thing or like a workflow by workflow thing. These days, I think to answer your question, I am trying to truncate the amount of reference that I use for objects, and I am trying to use more reference for figures.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I definitely think truncation makes sense given at some point you've done a lot of different kinds of things, and so you're probably looking up specifics to fill in gaps. Whereas,
Yeah.
you've done so much figure work, and really at this point you've drawn a lot of weird versions of beasts and a lot of specific technical objects, and so there might be some sort of sense memory, or like you can look at your own work, you can think through the earlier reference stream and research you did. Whereas with something totally new, right, you might want to pull up like even something as deceptively simple as a barrel, which isn't exactly a cylinder, like it has a shape. There
Yeah.
are sort of construction rules for what is it, a Cooper, right? So you might look up kind of early modern barrel construction and use that, and then also just think through each time, is there something I need to look up versus I can kind of make it up and go from there. And I wonder how much of that, because we don't always talk about this stuff, so I don't know how much is referenced from the final art versus some pieces probably are just you're rushing and you make them up and they look great. And so it's funny how those things might matter a lot in the moment, but then at the end of the day, what we're looking for is something kind of unique, that looks like it's by you, and you're very careful about, we've always talked a lot about basically not wanting to sort of copy others or steal anyone else's work. And, it always ends up being so different from the reference anyway that I wouldn't know. Right. So it's interesting to kind of look backward and see where this stuff comes from. Although in this case, right, say it's not so much informed by reference, but yeah, we should do that for one of these future ones, is pull up your reference and show us what you actually do with it. I think is always, just interesting to sort of see the process come to life.
I will say that as somebody who has a sketchbook process, so I sort of I divide my time between like illustration and art design work, and also fine art, which I think we've talked a little bit about. Is like they overlap. I think honestly they overlap more than I've been willing to like sort of like look at in the past, and I'm trying to like kind of bring them both together a little bit more these days. But they do ultimately wind up having their different processes. They're for different audiences. Um, I think for me, like across all of that, I keep a sketchbook practice. And oftentimes like I will just like come up with random shapes, and honestly, like the random shape file and like random shape practice, like especially like my more abstract pieces, wound up being really, really great for doing art for Archaeotech for Stillfleet, because it's like you're trying to come up with something that's familiar, but also from like the super future. So like trying to find the division between familiarity and something new and weird is actually like a really fun exercise. In terms of just like learning how to draw stuff, I tend to practice that stuff because I keep a sketchbook for fun. So it's really not that hard to sort of like then be like, oh, well, I don't know how to draw birthday cakes or wheelbarrows or stuff like that, where it's like, well, then I'll be like, oh, well, okay, I got half an hour right now. I want to learn how to draw a wheelbarrow. So I'd, look at wheelbarrows. I'd look at barrels. Like if I want to have it be like like a sliced open barrel, because this is like probably a guy from like the 1200s, like who's been caught in a loop, accumulating items in a forest for hundreds of years, tragic life. Then sort of like at some point it would be drawing from like different, like I'd be like, well, okay, so what's in his like wheelbarrow? Is he collecting treasure? Is he like, if a player decides to defeat this person and take their shit, like, is it ghost stuff? Is it like, has everyone learned a dark lesson about that because the stuff is worthless? Or is it like, this is actually a really great way to accumulate items in the game? This guy's wheelbarrow is full of real treasure versus like, haha, it's real, but it's all just a bunch of crap. All of those are like totally different things that would be in the wheelbarrow. And so like, if I were doing this as a concept sheet, I'd probably do it for the game at some point, would be like, come up with a winning like design and then do variants and then swap out like the schmutz that's inside the wheelbarrow or like what's on their back. And then like wind up being able to make like a bunch of different variations for it for the game, which is fun. But that all winds up just eventually being based in a sketchbook practice of like, what kind of shit's in there?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it'd be cool also to do. I think how we would do this without having to scan everything. It might be fun to do almost like a flip book. You just hold up a sketchbook and show us sometime. Again, maybe pre-plan a little bit and then figure out something where we could talk about reference, talk about analog media, and like look at some of the other things you're up to. Because it is really fun to see the sort of artboard in in Photoshop or another Adobe software, Affinity or something, and just see someone drawing or Procreate. But I think it's different, to bring in the physical and just to look at how those two things interact and how you would kind of do it soup to nuts. I maybe at some point we could also do the very different, since I am not very good at drawing figures, but I draw a lot of maps. I draw a lot of speculative geography, really as a GM, but then it is fun because it's like, to some degree, once we realized, okay, we're going to start publishing stuff, it's like, all right, well, the maps are part of the stuff. And, we can kind of go through that process too at some point. So I think there's a few different, themes that have emerged that we could spend more time on that I think would be really, really great.
No, that's a fun idea. I like that a lot of like finding, I'm sure there's a way. I have a stand that is used for doing Instagram reels of, it's like a top-down, like little army thing with a light on it that you can attach a phone to. So my guess is that's probably the way to do a flip book like screen. I'm sure technically we can figure it out, but that's a really great idea. That's super fun. We could do that for map shares and sketchbook shares. I actually recently went through. I had a bunch of half-finished sketchbooks when the pandemic like was really like when quarantine was really bad. And like there were shortages of everything. I like contacted the company and I bought like 5 sketchbooks of the kind that I really like all at once because I knew that they were going to like run out. And then because I'm me, I kind of got fitful and I started them all at once, and it's actually been really super bugging me. So recently I went through like all my sketchbooks, that collection of 5, and I basically ripped the book up and I recombined them into one sketchbook, and I took all the blank pages and I turned them into like a new fresh blank sketchbook. Because it's just paper and you can do stuff like that. Like it's just an object. But it was really actually fun going through like my old sketchbooks from that era and sort of taking a little bit of the charge and piss out of them because it's like some of that was done during a really not great time period. But it turns out that there were like some really surprising similarities between some of the drawings across these books. And so I started it where I could pairing them up with each other. So creating this new sort of like collaged sketchbook actually wound up being like a fun exercise to just sort of like bust up something that I was frustrated with, and take a look at. So I'll be happy to share that at some point.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I also keep sketchbooks more for insane lists of RPG things. Mostly table. Really, honestly, these days mostly to-do lists. But a lot of it, there's pieces of drawings of various kinds as well. Some of which is more sort of adornment or doodling, and some of which is meant to be really at this point again also more proto like wireframes, for maps that then I'm going to make.
Yeah.
And so, but using a lot of often I'll have tons of like pieces of analog media that I'll pull into the map, and use as texture and whatnot. So it's almost more chopping up digitally, things that I drew a long time ago with marker and highlighter to give this, at least for Stillfleet, the game, this kind of consistent feel of like, it's sort of real, but it's also not like on purpose. You're supposed to sort of fill in the gaps yourself and realize that the hand-drawn map is signaling that it's not, It's not real in the way that the D&D diegesis, you're supposed to like believe Feywild exists, right? And Stillfleet, it's meant to be a little wobbly, what even the company is telling you. Sometimes Kingdom is a little different in sort of the setup, but I think there is some of that with the hand-drawn nature of the art and the fact there's so much art. The idea is that it's, I think, hopefully prompting the reader to kind of fill in and create on their own. And I think the tone of the art sort of matches that.
We talk a lot about, we have, it's been actually a really interesting, like, I guess, like ongoing now, like 4-year conversation about, we talk about diegesis a lot, stuff that's inside, like inside the world and self-contained within it, whether, or something that's external to it, the design of something that is like, oh, you don't care if this is in world or out. It just like, sometimes with Dungeons and Dragons, they do a little bit of the skeuomorphic. It's like ye oldie timey like paper, like the whole book is like done on a texture, so it looks a little ancient. But that's mostly just for vibes. Versus like the idea of like what you're looking at is a piece of something that is actually from that world, that you as a player have been handed or you are inspecting. And I think both of us really like the charm of that and like opening up that idea of like, is what I'm holding an artifact from that world? Like, is the page that I'm looking at more within that world versus more like, oh, I'm playing a fun game. Like that sort of like really like it's pretty over the top, but it's like it is a really fun imagination game, and I really feel like it adds to a project, especially when you're dealing with something like the Sometimes Kingdom and Stillfleet is about time, because errata and marginalia and like design stuff is always very, very grounded in its time period. So especially with something like the Sometimes Kingdom, where it's like the Questing Network has been around for more than a millennia, it's sort of like, and it's a fantasy world, and fantasy like has been part of our society for so long, starting to mess with like, well, okay, is this thing, did they just throw this in the book because they had it from 800 years ago? They don't know what it is, or it's like, oh, is this a file from a thing? The game takes place in an unspecified portion of the late 20th century. So that's a lot of leeway in terms of like being able to kind of stitch together different time periods. And that opens up a lot of design imagination, especially if you're trying to like, how would you do diegesis for something like that? So hopefully it is something that is fun to read. It's certainly fun to make, but like to your point, hopefully will inspire people who are like looking at the thing to be like, oh yeah, I can collage something together, or like I can draw something like this. Like I want to make my own crap, which is really ultimately what games are about. Is like,
and there's a
people,
fun
like, take ownership of it.
There's a fun timelessness too to that, to the sort of scrawling in the margins, the graffiti on the walls of Roman mines under Paris or whatever. There's kind of a long history of people doodling that I think a lot of, not just us obviously, but a lot of the OSR has participated in. I'm thinking of the drawings of Scrap Princess for Veins of the Earth, and whatever it was, Fire on Velvet Mountain or whatever. But Veins of the Earth is the one that pops out to me as like a really beautiful finished product, but it's a sketchbook. It's like a sketchbook of weird black, gray, and white, Darrow and algae people or whatever. So I think, there's a degree to which the Sometimes Kingdom participates in that sort of faux old school, but like consciously faux old school sketchiness. And yeah, as you're saying, unpacking, like undoing some of the perfection driven, diegesis of the bigger companies, just because not only do we not have teams and teams of artists getting paid full time to do that kind of work, not that you could, again, you'd be capable of doing any one illustration. It's more just like volume, but then beyond that, it is like a different object, right? And it's doing a different thing. It's in there kind of competing with AAA video games in a way that we're not. And so I think when you're doing more story driven games, and the charm of the indie, the sort of aura of the handcrafted, which is something obviously we're playing around with, even just by having the stream where we sort of watch y'all draw. I think that's something to highlight and not bury. So I think Sometimes Kingdom will be a fun one that's going to be very different looking, even though it's also fantasy, but it's going to look different from D&D. It's going to look different from Danse Macabre. It's going to have its own, visual language. And so in this case, we're looking at some of your work with set of figures and the monstrous or the villains from a narrative point of view, but then also objects, right? And blending. I think a lot of the characters have like, they're sort of weirdly made up of objects. There's a lot of versions of like assemblage monsters and stuff. So I think this is beginning to get into that territory here.
It's my very, like, I don't know, It is cool seeing Blister Critters too, because it's nice to see like Tony's got this like, and it's so funny because it's the same obsession, it's same but different. Like it's like his conception of living objects is so completely different from mine, and it's so rad to see how much space there is for something like that.
Yeah. So walk us through what you're doing right now. So you had a sketch that it looked like, as we were talking, you kind of picked as the final sketch here, and then kind of ghosted it. And now you're drawing the sort of humanoid part of the cart ghast. So talk me through, are the cart ghast arms meant to be permanently locked into the cart, into the sort of wheelbarrow, or is it they could sort of stop holding it and they just choose to hold it and drive it?
That's a really interesting question. Now that I'm thinking about it after you said that, it feels like it would be like they want to hold onto this wheelbarrow as much as humanly possible. Like they're rolling a barrel along the ground, or they're like rolling a cart, or they're holding a trunk or a backpack, whatever it is. Like they want to hold onto it no matter what. So they will attempt to kill you or scare you away while still holding onto this. And then if you make them drop it, there might be like one final burst of activity where they use up all of their grit. You know, they're furious at you. That's like where the like, you know, Beetlejuice mask off like Ghostbusters monster comes out finally. Because you're taking away their shit. They had to, you know, it's their shit. They want it so badly. How dare you? They just want to roll their stuff around forever. But they're also terrorizing people, so maybe they've got to stop doing that.
Yeah, so they're not a Cronenbergian fused into the wood thing. They are choosing to hold it. It's more that obsession, like you're saying about certain. There's kind of that yokai like mono focused ghost, and so this is almost a ghost who's focused on this wheelbarrow. What is in the wheelbarrow, the cart?
That's a good question. I don't know yet. I think I'm imagining, because it is sort of like, I think kind of the idea behind this one is like, you know, there's always players who want to accumulate stuff. I'm guilty of this myself often. Not that it's a bad thing, it's simply a trope, and a selected kind of like understood game activity, because it's harder to accumulate things in the real world, and it's really easy when they don't exist. But I imagine that like there are players who are going to want to sift through all of the things that are like left behind, and it's like, yeah, there's like such a large, okay, like it's going to take you an hour of in game time to like sift through it to find the wheat from the chaff, unless you are just interested in all of it, in which case odds are you probably are slowly turning into a cart gas yourself. Or you know, you use your reason, you know, you try and roll a really high reason to be like, I see in this giant pile of schmata, there's the one thing that I need. Like maybe it's a MacGuffin, or it is like a really powerful artifact that nobody but me with my you know 12 reason roll noticed. So what should be in here should probably be an accumulation of stuff from a very long time, which means I don't think it's going to be ghost crap.
I haven't heard you say any specific objects, so it sounds like you're
Yeah.
not picturing, like in terms of a drawing task, you don't have a sense of what you're going to draw yet.
I don't have a
That's
drawing
like
stack. I've got
to-do.
an idea of the perspective of it and what the pile's going to be. I'm seeing now also, because I've made his arm so long, I'm going to actually move the entire wheelbarrow probably over a little bit more to match it. Magic of digital. And now that I'm looking at this thing, yeah, so that's going to be something I hadn't considered. Cool. Yeah.
Can you zoom in a bit? Because if you look your view,
Sure.
you have a lot of that gray. So I think we'd rather see, you know, a little bit
See
tighter.
this thing. Yeah, there we go. So I'm thinking, you know, because the whole visual conceit behind the Sometimes Kingdom is that it's like it's post-medieval with like the broadest like ridiculous understanding of that, because it's like you can still be a knight and they're, you know, it's a job title. You know, there's magicians. It's sort of like you know, people to a certain extent based on where you're from are sort of like what are the temporal vibes of where you're from. So I'm imagining like if it's got this like big thing, I already sort of mapped out this idea of a stack. Like I've got a like very strong foundation of sort of like, if I were to do this more like a Garfield comic, like, or like a Calvin and Hobbes comic, it could just be a pile of abstracted like garbage and people would get it because it'd be just enough shading and just enough line work So I'd be like, yep, that it surely is a pile of crap, and I can see that there's a banana and like a crown in there, and the rest of it I can fill in with my imagination. There probably will be like some of that because I don't think I'm going to draw all of it. But like there should definitely be some like objectively useful things for like players if they wanted to. So like maybe there's a helm, like a really big helm with like a crest. There should be like a mix of time periods in here. Like what are some other good objects? Maybe it's the helmet of a giant, so it's actually not that helpful unless your player is a giant.
Yeah, but I get it. So you're going to basically pick, it sounds like a few, and from it, this makes sense from a drawing standpoint, 2 or 3 representative objects to try to draw more clearly, and then a lot of the rest will be kind of squiggles that are like abstract schmutz, like just, you know, organic or inorganic trash, like you don't really know, you don't need to know.
And it's
but
like,
you see
again,
that gleaming helmet or something.
If this were a hero illustration and sort of the expectations would be that it would take up an entire page on its own, that would be a moment of being like, okay, well, maybe I want to translate that. I could redo the pile of crap in like a really artistic way. Or then start defining what all the objects are, because like you want people to linger on the drawing for like a long time and like look at all the crazy Where's Waldo like little bits of treasure and bobs in it. I think for
Ethan, I hate to cut you off. Your mic is very crackly, and I didn't want to say anything, but it's getting. I think it might be getting worse.
No.
I don't know if there's any way to not
see.
have it be so crackly as you draw, so you can.
No. Let's see what we got.
Hear what you're saying a little more clearly.
I'm gonna go into settings really quickly, and I'm gonna.
It sounds like something is loose, a connection. It sounds very much like a fuzzy connection to me.
See, my guess is my
hey,
headphones
that's better.
started hijacking the microphone. Yeah, no, my Bose headphones hijacked the microphone, so it's 2 channels of audio is just too much for Bluetooth.
Yeah, I got it. That's something I can try to check better when we go live for these things. We're just running behind today with tech stuff, so sorry about that. But yes, now you sound way better. So definitely something to also just double check. Next time in a couple weeks. Now we can hear you. So you were saying about the pile of trash that the Carcast is.
The pile of trash, yeah. So if depending on the size and the detail of it, like I would go in and like make the pile be like very substantive because you want people to get lost in it. And again, like it's sort of funny because if I were doing this drawing by hand, in a lot of ways it would be easier for me because it's like pens and pencils and paper have natural limitations on them. They've got natural limitations of resolution and size, which really work in their favor. So in a way, if I were doing this as a pencil sketch, it might be like more of a balance between like impressionistic and realistic, because there's that natural, like the pencil can only be so fine a point, if it's just on a page that's going to be scanned. Versus like a digital, one of the challenges of digital is you kind of have to set up the limitations yourself ahead of time. Because otherwise, like you will spend a dozen hours painstakingly drawing every like object in something and zooming in, and then when you see it on the page, it's a quarter page black and white yellow in an A5 book. It's like, well, I know that it's really detailed, but you don't really pick up on that resolution.
Yeah, we'd have to do like a poster version or a T-shirt or something.
Yeah.
To really show it off, and we can't do that for 100 illustrations, right? So it becomes a choice about where to spend time and resources. Yeah.
That's just the ruthlessness of illustration. One of the things about like, and again, I'm using these terms very liberally. Like, I'm not saying that these are rigid, hard and fast categories. One of the differences between design and illustration and fine art is that, like, in fine art, it doesn't matter. I'd be spending 3 months on a small drawing because I want to be spending 3 months on a small drawing. And then the dizzying gee whiz maximalist quality of it is the purpose of the art. Versus like, I need to convey how players are in danger.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so much, and we've talked about that, but things can be expressionistic or abstract to a degree, but some of it is just representing key points
it's just got to be representative.
Are hooks, or what we'd say in game design terms, affordances, where a player can interact with the thing. So, they're objects, right? An object-oriented design in a computer system, you have to make, okay, if there's a hitbox, then that's like an object, or it's like a layer on top of an object. And for RPGs, often there's much more squishiness, and you're simulating much broader categories, and it's more driven by story. But even so, in order to sculpt a narrative, to have people generate a narrative that's fun, they have to have a sense of like, okay, what are the objects around me? It's that classic mud question of like, okay, what's in the room? All right, there's this, you can move north, south, east, west, whatever. And here we're opening it up a lot, and we're having a lot of cool ideas. But when it comes to encounter design specifically, it is that question of, okay, generally the object is a beast that is scary, and the scariness is on a spectrum from not really that scary to it's the Tarrasque, it's a dragon. And so I think often players do come in with that expectation of, GM, tell me, how scary is this thing? What do I know about it? Does it have weaknesses? That's really not in a lot of games. And currently it's not really too much in Sometimes Kingdom, but we haven't written all the entries yet, right? So we could write in like, hey, if a player asks to do X or uses a spell of Y kind or has Z object, then it does, double damage or, so I think that'd be fun to kind of think about. But from an illustration point, all just to say, I think maybe the objects in the cart is a question. That was a question I had is this meant to be a lure, where the player is like, oh, I want that. Or is it meant to be, oh, that's just gross and it's kind of a joke, and maybe again, you're developing that as you draw, which is different maybe than how I would write it. But it's like, either way, you just, at some point you just make a choice and like, yeah, this is the direction I'm going, right? It is
again, that same sort of like thing about like making choices means like terminating other choices. And that's just the business of living. It's funny because I feel like a lot of my art winds up being kind of like this kind of hilariously immature rebellion against that. It's like, oh, I've got to make decisions. Well, here's every single object in the universe on this page. But it doesn't always work for illustration. I think for this one, to your point, I think it would be way more fun if it's a lure, because it's like, oh, that treasure is worth, like, if it's worth so much money, or like you can definitely see that there is like a great helm object in it. Like you can imagine if there's a party fighting this, like there's going to be one player who just really, like, their character's going to want to go after that so badly. And the other player's like, nope, it's going to kill us. I'm from Spring. It's going to kill us. It's like, nah, I really want that great helm. Really want it. So it's sort of like the lure of it drawing you into an encounter is like, it's so obviously a trap, but it kind of doesn't matter. So I feel like it's a character that, like, I'm drawing it right now that it notices you, which is probably way more dangerous than if it's just doing its own thing. So this encounter is sort of like the moment that it sees that you're after its shit.
Yeah, I like the tilt of the head. Yeah,
it's gone from goofy to sort of like, shit.
So yeah, and so that's an interesting way to think about it, which is a little bit different. So if we were just talking about how we design games, like with Stillfleet, I pretty much wrote the encounters, and then you or Tony or Ib did the art. And all under your art direction. So the art was kind of following. Whereas in this, the way we're doing it now for SK, I'm realizing, is almost like the art is, at least for some pieces, going to lead, where you'll have an art piece, and then we're going to make up stats around it and just kind of agree on like the vibe, in large part based on the art. We're not going to change the art. So I think that's totally fair. I think that's also similar to Danse Macabre, where Chris, I'd have to ask Chris, we could have them on and talk through it. But, are they drawing hordes of demoniacs and then drawing and then writing out the stats, or is it sort of like, there's certain stat blocks and then we need certain illustrations? I feel like it's the former. I think the drawings are leading there too, and the stats are kind of filling in. But it is interesting. I don't know how much that matters. Maybe it doesn't, and it just becomes kind of similar in the end when you're playing.
I think ultimately, I think they're like, again, it's sort of, we're sort of making this up as we go along. My theory is that the end result will probably wind up getting to the same place, in the sense of like, oh, enjoyment, charm, playability, repeat playability, like drawing a player in, like that's always the goal. I think that it's going to wind up getting there through a different route. Like there is precedent for stuff being like art forward or board driven, but I feel like in games it's less so, because like, games are they are mechanical based, they are stats based. Like the whole ultimate idea of it is like making rules that dovetail with what you see and experience, like in a way that is like, yep, this feels right. Like it's almost like cinematography to a certain extent, but with math. You're just like, this feels like and looks like how it plays. So starting with the art, I think is like, it's interesting because it's just a different process. Ultimately, like the art could be changed. It's like, oh, actually, like a stat block should be a different thing, or like this scene or like this area really needs to have a different feeling to it. And the only way to get there is with a certain kind of mechanicalization, and the art is just not reflecting that mechanics. We've talked about this a lot. Like, I mean, personally, my biggest gripe with Dragon Game is that like the actual mechanicalization of stuff is misaligned with what the art and what the copy promises. And so like trying to marry that stuff a little bit tighter to have a better sort of game experience, I feel like that can start from anywhere. But then like, to your point, then the mechanics and math work has to be done to make sure. And it's like, if it winds up not being an enjoyable playability, the art needs to be ransacked to make sure that it's in line with whatever works best.
Yeah, well, there's kind of making things sync up a certain way, but that gets to the earlier conversation about levels of abstraction and representation. So, like, if in their game they're promising a AAA video game kind of experience, then there is more of an expectation of one-to-one. So if something is mentioned, I sort of want to see it as it is described, because it's supposed to be this very visually real, I'm sinking into a real fantasy world experience. With our games, and I think a lot of the OSR and NSR, it's a little more abstracted, where it's a type of a thing, or you're meant to fill it in, or it's a bit cheeky. There's a kind of level of satire, or like, kind of postmodern, like meta, fucking around with genre. So I think it's interesting to think through that. Like here, I would say this looks real enough where, you could just say, look, this is a real ghost, right? Whatever. They have certain characteristics. They're doing certain actions, and you interact with them mechanically then a certain way. But I think just because it's sketchy, it's gestural, and, packed among, crowded around by all this other gestural art, that might change the tone a little. I think we always talk about like that Pareto principle idea of like, we want to deliver 80% of Dragon game, representation focused art, because we want people to who mostly are coming from that tradition to buy our games, right? So there's a kind of like mercenary aspect, but also in a deeper level, there's a like enjoyment aspect. We want them to have fun and sink in and not think too much about it and not get caught up in art history. I mean, these are conversations we have on the back end that we don't really foreground. We don't have long asides. We might mention here and there in kind of meta notes. But generally these games are just, they're meant to be fun, right? That's the goal. And so we don't bury what we're doing, and here we're trying to be transparent and have fun with it as just like a way to, in a way you and me are hanging out, getting stuff done, but also think through some of these questions, answer some of these questions for ourselves. But in the final result, it just doesn't matter maybe to many players. Maybe some of them enjoy that, and I think it'd be great over time to get players too. We've talked about, we were talking with Taylor Z about having her on as well, but I think it'd be fun to have other artists and people playing the games and talk about kind of what art they like and why. It'd be fun for us as GMs, but also in a sort of philosophical level, these questions around like, when they look at art for a game, what do they expect? I think that's like a non-trivial question that I don't know.
That's never a really interesting, honestly,
right? We just make it up.
That's a great thing, because it's like, that's a little bit, I mean, market research, but like on top of that, like I feel like that's a really interesting question to ask people while they're playing or while they're drawing or watching. Like, I'm now super interested in that, because that's not something that's often like talked about in the moment.
Ethan, do you mind if Tony has like we only have 5 minutes left? If Tony pops in, we just kind of say hi and chat.
Awesome sauce. Yes, please,
cool.
please.
Cool. I sent them the link, so Tony's gonna maybe pop in, and we're gonna just round it out. And yeah, we can go a little over, but I just want to keep these relatively short, low key. And then once Tony said hi, maybe we'll do a last sort of discussion point wrap up for today. The CarCast looks awesome, but still, still in a sketchy state. So I think that'll be maybe one either we can come back to here, or maybe just check in if you do it, some other time. We can check in and see sort of where it landed. And obviously, as SK, we were just talking about the zines and all this stuff. So as we develop more of a plan for the game in terms of print publication, we can also share that and talk through, okay, now that we have a plan, and maybe that'll be interesting to some folks at least. Now that we have a plan, how do we get these specific list of assets done, right? So it looks like we're waiting on Tony's mic and camera. I can add him.
Tony.
This is my universal technology. Please work. Here we go.
An invocation to the technical gods.
Anthony Grasso, aka Odd Gob Games. What's up, Tony?
Yo.
Hello.
Ethan was drawing
heard y'all were talking about art and stuff.
Yeah, we're talking about art. We're doing one illustration for the Sometimes Kingdom. This is a monster called the Cartgast.
I could hear the stream before, but it's just quiet on this end.
It's been all day for us. I don't think I'm muted, so I think it's. I'll message you. You can't hear me.
Well, I'm stopping in to say hi, and then I.
Hey, Tony.
There it is. I think I can hear everybody now. I can hear Ethan.
Okay, cool. Can you hear me? I am unmuted and talking.
Hear Wythe.
Ethan, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. So.
Weird. Ain't no thing.
Yeah, no worries. Well, Tony, another time when
I'm sure it's probably just me. Well,
the
I'm
streaming
just stopping to
gods
say
blessed
hi
us.
and bye.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about artwork too, and maybe when technology catches up, we can actually talk about it together.
Yeah.
I spent all morning looking at like artwork and thinking about specifically the question you guys just asked, but the tech gods do not want us to have a commingling conversation about it, I guess.
Yeah, Tony, you're coming on next time, and we're gonna talk about that specific thing. So
yeah, cool. Yeah, no, sign me up. I
literally
spent all morning flipping through like 18th and 19th century like children's book illustrations.
Hell yeah.
And I've developed like a bunch of thoughts about that specific question. So I would like to actually have a conversation next time about that.
Yeah, I'm super curious at what you found. I've got some some archives to throw at you.
Yeah, please
about
do.
That stuff. Yeah,
I'm amassing like an ongoing like archive list on the shared Google Doc at the moment.
Speaking of treasure hoards.
Yeah,
nice. Well,
sweet.
Yeah, next time. So these are, I think, meant to be, fun, open, informal conversations with the team, and we were saying with anybody. So we'll keep it going. Tony, you should join us, and we'll do Tony and Ethan talk about reference and representation and all these questions. And we'll look at other games. For today, this has been, the Sometimes Kingdom, working on the Cartgast, this kind of techno ghost, but kind of early modern. A little bit yokai inspired, and we'll see sort of where it nets out. But for now, you get a sense of the sketch.
Fun. I'll bring the finished one next time, or we'll post it on Instagram at Retro House.
Ethan, do you want to say any last things, or do you want to talk to Tony about anything before we close? Since I should not moderate, since Tony cannot hear me.
No, Tony, can you hear me?
I can hear Ethan. I can't hear.
Oh, you can hear me. This is
why this is like a Muppet and Ethan's responding.
It's just like ma. Oh, that's
it's
just like FOMO's rough. Yes. I'd actually, it's funny because like I feel like artistically, in terms of like both vibe and structure for like a lot of stuff for the Sometimes Kingdom, that specific time period you had been mentioning is one that's like it's very dear to my heart in a previous life as a curator and then also as an illustrator who used to almost exclusively work by tiny pen and Crowquill. I'd definitely love to see your thoughts on that stuff. I feel like that might be a really juicy area for Sometimes Kingdom Blister Critters crossover.
Oh, 100%. That'd actually be really, really cool to explore. Yeah. One of the things I'm surprised at, like the breadth of like the different styles. They all feel of the era, but if you look hard enough, there's a lot of different things going on. So I'm excited to explore it for.
Yeah, and there were some real. And some of those camps were really opposed. That's back when like artists really cared about what school of thought they applied to. Like they were really at each other's throats about this stuff.
Well, I think with that, that sounds like a game plan. So Tony, you can't hear me, but I'll type out in the chat for you. But we're going to do that next time. For this time, it's been Ethan Gouldini with a little bit of a special guest, Anthony Grasso. And we've been working on art or Ethan has been. I have not really been doing anything. I'm just chatting. The Sometimes Kingdom RPG.
Spirit.
And you can pick up that game from Itch and TTRPG, or check out our website that has links. And you can also pick up, you can follow our newest game, Danse Macabre, Medieval Horror Roleplaying, which is in development over on Kickstarter. And yeah, Tony's lead on Blister Critters, which we're about to produce some new zine little booklets for. So a lot of fun, exciting things are in the works. We finally are kind of getting our act together in terms of being able to put out, regular product more regularly. Ethan, thanks so much. We will see you in 2 weeks. Yeah. Tony, thank you for joining. Please, Ethan, can you thank Tony? And then I'm going to close the stream once you tell him.
Thank you, Tony. Wythe says thank you, Tony. Tony says thank you, Wythe. Wythe says thank you, Wythe. Ethan says thank you, Tony. And Wythe, thank you all so much. And we'll see you next time.